Hi everyone, welcome to our QUESCREN Lunch and Learn, Vitality to Vitality of Memory. So I'm Anna Hunt from QUESCREN, Quebec English-Speaking Communities Research Network. I'd just like to acknowledge the Indigenous peoples of all the lands that we're on today. So while we're on a virtual platform, Concordia, myself, many, if not all of us, are located on unceded Indigenous lands. The Gahaga Nation is recognized as the custodians of these lands and waters. Tiohtià:ke, Montreal, is historically known as a gathering place for many First Nations. Today is home to a diverse population of Indigenous and other peoples, but we want to stress that we respect the continued connections with the past, present, and future in our ongoing relationships with Indigenous and other peoples within the Montreal community and beyond. So now what I'm going to do is pass you over to our moderator, Lorena Doddle, a research associate at QUESCREN, and I wish you all a happy event. Take it away, Lorraine.
Thank you, Anna. Hi, everybody. I'm from the Quebec English-Speaking Communities Research Network at Concordia University. I'm so thrilled that everybody is here today. I will start by acknowledging our sponsors. They are the Secretariat aux relations avec les Québécois d'expression anglaise. And we're expecting a couple of people from the Secretariat. We are also sponsored by Canadian Heritage, and I wanted to acknowledge, I think I've already seen Valérie Girard and Marie-Hélène Benoit in the room. Welcome. We have Concordia University represented by several people here today, including QUESCREN co-director, Dr. Chedli Belkoja. And our other regular funder is Canadian Institute for Research on Linguistic Minorities. Without further ado, I will introduce our speaker today. Alain Roy is a historian. Specialized in heritage and memory issues, he has written numerous books, articles, and reports. He is a regular researcher at the Laboratoire d'Histoire et de Patrimoine de Montréal at Université de Québec à Montréal. Alain has been with Library and Archives Canada since 2008, where he currently holds a position as Senior Analyst in Strategic Research, focusing on official languages issues. Another thing that Alain is known for in the community, he, along with Linda Savoie from Library and Archives Canada, who is also here today, hello Linda, have for some years been very dynamic in leading a group with Library and Archives Canada to pull together representatives of official language minority community, archives, and heritage institutions. And they're creating a dynamic interaction between us across Canada, for which we're very appreciative. So without further ado, I will give the floor to Alain Roy.
So hi everyone, I'm really pleased to be with you today to present, in fact, this important concept paper that was developed at LAC. So first of all, I would like to really warmly welcome, thank QUESCREN and particularly Lorraine, because we worked for years on those issues of memory and official language minority communities. And this report that I present today is a kind of a sum of all the reflections we did and about, in fact, a role of memory in the vitality. And I'm really proud to present it because it's really like a foundation for an in-depth reflection on that role and particularly on how it supports vitality. So this question of memory and language is a quite important one, and it's also a current issue. And if there's anything that I want you to keep in mind after my presentation, there are two main points or two key messages. The first one is about the content. That is, that relationship between language and heritage is really important. And the translation we have on the presentation now is from a letter written by Serge Royal and Phyllis Lambert about the Heritage Act that was debated and approved in Quebec National Assembly. And their point is that heritage and language goes together. The French, the language is valued because it's a common to us, but heritage because it tells us who we are throughout history. So they are, and this question of linking heritage and memory with language is really important. The second message, in fact, the second important message I want you to remember is about the process. And in fact, this is where in LAC, in fact, role is quite important, because as Mélanie Joly wrote in our paper about the towards for the reform to the Official Language Act, she wrote that, you know, language minority communities are entitled to strong institutions supported by and for them that ensure their vitality and sustainability, and the federal government will stand by them. And this is also a reflection on how this important report was done and supported by LEC. So the presentation today has 4 parts. So first of all, I'll talk about the concept paper, where it comes from, what was the outcome we want to develop with it. Second was a part about how we move from vitality to vitality of memory as part of this important reflection. Then, like how we can apprehend, in fact, memory as an ecosystem, and therefore how we can, in fact, support the vitality. And if we have time, I will present an example, a concrete example, which a short research has been done on Mayerville, and then about what will follow. So the starting question is quite simple. Official Language Act is quite clear. Our Government of Canada institution must take positive measures to enhance the vitality of English and French linguistic minority communities in Canada. So this is clear, even, but you know, it will get clearer with the new act, but this was the statement. But for memory institutions like Library and Archives or Parks Canada or others, the question is not so simple, because how we can as institutions support the vitality leads to another question, which is how heritage, and particularly documentary heritage in the case of LEC, contributes to the vitality of the community. And then this is where things get complicated. So it's complicated because, first of all, the Official Language Act does not define what are positive measures, what is vitality or development of OLMCs. And this was effectively raised in the process of reviewing the Act. Also, there was a number of studies about the facets of this vitality, but very few of them paid attention to history, heritage, and memory, which is in fact a major aspect of identities of LMCs and more generally of any society. Often history and heritage are like a general reference, but not really considered as really an aspect of the vitality. So considering that, we started a study about, as a memory institution, what are the characteristics of this contribution of memory and heritage to the vitality of OLMCs? And this is where started, in fact, the current research. So it started, in fact, in 2017. So first of all, there was a survey of some specialists archivists or historians. We had even at that time a discussion with Patrick and Lorraine on this topic. We have also a literature review of the concept of vitality of its component, as well as, excuse me, a review of the memory, heritage, and WLMC. So from this discussion, from this core, all this serves to build like a certain consideration. Then we made presentation to discuss the proposed concept in 2019, first as Association des archivistes, and then au Conseil international des études francophones, and also in 2020 at the Office of the Commissioner of Official Languages. But still, we want to have like a stronger report, so we looked for a scientific validation, which was done with 14 high-level university researchers. So a draft was submitted, and then 2 discussion sessions were held in October 19, I think it's 2020, sorry, and then it helped to improve the document. So the final version was approved in January and is available online. So the concept paper itself is composed of 4 parts. First, the literature review of the role of memory, then a proposition of concept, which includes a definition, characteristic, and a model, a way of modeling it, and the study of the specific contribution of documentary heritage, archives, and libraries. But this part, I won't address it today because just to make sure that we have enough time for the discussion. And then an application of a concept to a concrete example, which is Maillardville in British Columbia. So vitality, this is an evolving concept. In fact, the first research on the overall vitality of WLMC started in the 70s and 80s, characterized by a focus on demographic and socio-linguistic data, and thus particularly associated with language practices. But this was like opened since 2005, 2006 for a broader societal perspective as validating the concept in the field. For example, the Canadian Heritage created a framework in 2012 to consolidate those various dimensions. There were at that time 12 indicators, but essentially they're still based on the concept of ethno-linguistic vitality. There were also other research, including institutional completeness, the spatial dimension of this vitality, which was done particularly by Anne Gilbert at the University of Ottawa, and the artistic dimension of vitality, which was put forward by Fédération culturelle canadienne-française in 2018. This led us, but in fact, so at the end, in fact, 68 communities or sets of communities underwent field validation, but only a dozen or so address memory and heritage issues in any way. And for the English-speaking community, there were like studies of Beaconsfield, there were 4 of them, in fact, Beaconsfield, and also Pontiac and 2 others, so Eastern Townships, and 1 in Gaspésia. So, but this is really, they were like, the question of memory was really addressed like slightly, just on surface. Okay, so historicity and vitality of memory. So it's so the question of integration of culture into the concept of vitality, in fact, leads to a recognition of the role of place of the past in that vitality. As a study by the Fédération culturelle canadienne-française points out in 2018, and this could be like applied to all OLMCs, everything pertaining to minority Francophone culture is not just linguistic. The linguistic component is not the entire specificity of the Francophone minority. Added to this, among other things, are values, historicity, and a relationship to the environment. And so the historicity is a key element of identity representation. It's manifested in a wide range of memories, practices, and which define, in fact, the vitality of memory, which could be observable in the presence of a past in different areas of a community collective life. It reflects in the present their shared experience through time and the community bond that ensures that potential. So it derives and sustains the minority community's ability to assert itself as distinct. So on this basis, we had to think about more in depth about what could be this historicity and the different components of it. So for now, just to make sure that and as a foundation, we propose like a few definitions. First, the historicity, it's the community presence in time, allowing the insertion of reminders of the past into the present in a perspective of duration, with both a look to the past and view of the future. And historicity is different from heritage, which can be defined as the traces left by this past, which could be material, intangible, or documentary. The history is different too from heritage because it's mostly knowledge built from research based on a scientific methodology, which relates to the past, but informs also the community. And memory in that context is all the manifestations of a community's remembrance in the present. It could be expressed in multiple ways and involves complex interactions. The result is really an open-minded and shared narrative. And the vitality of memory is the strength and diversity with which a community express itself in the past and in a determined, real and symbolic space. We can define the vitality memory as an ecosystem. It's an ecosystem because all the reminders of the community's past and the present are seen in what might be called an ecosystem that encompasses its various manifestations. Because memory is not only like a monument, it could be the name of the street name, or it could be a book, it could be a historical society. So there's a variety of expression of the past in the community, and they all relate all together. These reminders often interact and affect many aspects. For example, you could have like a topic that is mentioned in the school that your parents will remind you, and that in fact will be also reminded through an exhibition. So all of this like act all together, but most of the time, all these reminders are being like examined on this differently and not as a system. For example, historian looks at some aspects, some monuments or some aspect, but not all of this ecosystem altogether. This ecosystem is evolutionary too because it incorporates change into the collective representation of the past. For example, the integration of women is recent, or the minorities. So there could be like different aspects that could be added through time and the strength also of this memory, and this is therefore its ability to create a social bond, depends on the community's ability to activate its characteristic traits. I mean by there that, you know, the strength will create like the social fabrics that will support, in fact, the community. And in that sense, consolidating the social fabric, it will also support the vitality. So this concept of vitality of memory could be also as many characteristics. And for example, there's multiplicity, and when you have different activities of expressions of memory about different, for example, persons or events that could be related to all together. The intensity is when you have like an event or a person which is remembered through different means. Diversity is how the memory, in fact, expressed of the community reflects its diversity. Would be ethnic origin, could be social groups, etc. So there's like diversity of the group itself. Opening and closing is about how the perspective of the past, of the future, in fact, inform the way you think of your past. Because if you are, forecasting that the community will be extinguished in a few years, the relationship to the past will change. Or if you are seeing it as a progress and see it as progressing, then it will be like seen positively. So this will have impact on the type of vitality of memory you will develop, and also on how it could appeal to other people or to other members of the community. And sharing is also an important aspect of it, would be within the community or also with a majority. This ecosystem is really complex and covers different dimensions. So, for example, you have in the environment, the toponymy, monuments, built heritage, libraries, cultural institutions, libraries and archives, also cultural practices, associations, activities, research, cultural productions, our school, and in which, in fact, the past is seen or presented. So you could have, for example, the schools, theater, literature, like novels, etc. And there's also some other symbolic dimensions. Last section is about Maillardville, which was an interesting example. I had to do a presentation in a seminar, and so I did a short research on what could be an example of this vitality of memory. So the case of Maillardville is interesting because it's seen as if I can say it, like a dead duck first in the 70s, because Jacques Ferron said, we don't care in any way because that poor people were quickly become anglicized. But in 2012, in fact, there was a different approach of it, and say that, yeah, there is a paradoxical situation where, in fact, the Francophones get a minority a bit, but in fact, there's still a community spirit that remains. And in fact, the researcher in that paper asked himself what was the anchorage, in fact, of this community, and collective memory could stimulate activism and social activity. So in short, how does memory manifest itself, and how does it strengthen the social cultural fabric of this community? So my research is a manifest memory. So you could have, in the landscape, you have commemorative plaques, public art, heritage sites, interpretation, shared also interest in heritage. For example, the city of Coquitlam, which is English-speaking, was interested to preserve, in fact, the French heritage over there. There were a different aspect of revitalization. And for example, in the Olympic Games, it was seen as a Francophone village. So there was a recognition from not only from Francophone, but also from the majority that this was an interesting site. There are different associations and festivals, including the Festival du Bois, which happens there since 1989, and also literary works. For example, since 2010, there are 5 or 6 novels that address, in fact, the birth of the community. They have been written in French, also in English. And the same in history books. There are 8 public works that were published, but some in French, some in English, and some bilingual. And some on Maillardville, some on Coquitlam, but still covering this aspect. Lots of dissertations, some repositories, and also 6 collections of our oral history. So instead of having like this community being like dead to disappearing, in fact, Joan Zuma, which was the president of the Société Francophone, said exactly the opposite. So it was like really interesting to see our memory, in fact, recognized not only within the community, but also with a majority, make sure that this the social fabric was maintained. So conclusion, in fact, the concept paper is just a foundation. It's like a reflection that starts, in fact, to a more in-depth examination of the idea and testing. So we just did the public launch, which was in French in February 24th, and today it's like our public launch in English. There will be presentation at various symposia in history or memory studies association, for example, and will be also some papers that will be written for its journals. We also, on that basis, there will emerge also the idea of going further as on research. So there's an Edmonton pilot project that was launched in January, founded by a researcher in York University, and with the support of Denis Racine, the Société d'Histoire Francophone de l'Alberta. And then also there will be also a planned short research involving all 11 university and community researchers that will be will try to validate and further develop the concept, and also a community involvement through meeting of association interest in the topic. I want to make sure that you know about this conference because Library and Archives Canada organizes with two partners, which are Abo Franco, Association Bibliothèque de l'Ontario, section francophone, and le Centre de Recherche de Civilisation Canadienne Française, with the support of two networks that Lorraine mentioned at the beginning. So for the first time, this conference will put spotlight on contribution on archives and libraries to the vitality of OLMCs. There will be an opening session, 4 panels, 2 café rencontres, and it will be online, free, open to all, with simultaneous translation. So you are really invited. I leave you this is done for me.
You're not done yet, Alain.
Oh, no, okay.
No, we now have a good amount of time for questions, but also for discussion and comments. And Alain reiterated to me prior to getting this show on the road that he really wanted to have a discussion about this concept. So Alain, I'll just open the floor by noting that as you said, there are two things going on. There's the concept itself and the development and the great work you've done in developing the concept. And then there's the context, so the process and the embeddedness of this concept in a policy and legal framework, which is also of interest to some of our people in the audience today. So Alain, I invite you to see a comment here by Michel Thibault, and I'll read it out. It has been interesting to see how the pandemic has changed the ways in which we gather as communities. Quebec's English-speaking communities and groups, from Gaspésian Christmas celebrations to Kwan's cultural and historical talks, have exploded in the virtual space over the past year. So Michel is curious how this will translate in coming years in increasing community vitality and fostering new connections between people, communities, and organizations. Michel, what a great comment and question. And Alain, I wonder if you have some comments about that and whether that could work into your ecosystem.
Yeah, it could be also interesting to hear Quan about, because this is also the way Quan can extend. In fact, this is exactly what we were discussing just before the session, how the new media, in fact, help people to connect and create communities. But for sure, for now, it's like we are stuck with a pandemic, and you know, this is like making it difficult to connect with real people, which is also the something that is needed. But for sure, the Zoom and help to create those communities and also to disseminate the ideas, I think, more easily than before. This session, for example, is an example of how we can, in fact, have those discussions. So it's something that will continue when we will be back with normal relationships.
Sam says, you mentioned landscape as important in memory, yet ignore the changing of historical names, for example. So I guess that's a question about toponymy. Is that correct, Sam?
Yes. Just how do you deal with the Quebec's policy of changing historical names? For example, the Eastern Township is now Lestry in federally funded textbooks, and that to me, historical names is tremendously important for remembering the past. And one finds where my cottage is, it used to be Lake Barron. Barron was a man, John Barron. Now it's Lac Barron, trying to eradicate the memory that it was an Anglophone. And I think you're not mentioning the effort to eradicate English in public memory. You mentioned St. Lambert, where I live. They've got rid of the war memorial. It used to be a bilingual city. It's now a unilingual city. I think that's an excellent example to see what's happening in Quebec. The library, for example, used to be the War Memorial Library. It was founded after World War II by people in memory of the war dead. They've taken that down. It's now the Bibliothèque or something, Saint Lambert. That's my question. The changing of historical names in Quebec. You haven't dealt with this. Why?
Anyway, the issue of renaming, in fact, is also related to, all this debate. And it's more like a political issue that I'm not really the best person to discuss. But renaming streets, renaming is also part of this decolonization of different stuff, and this will affect different communities for sure. And in fact, we have to consider that history, there's difference between history and memory. So history is really a knowledge, and memory is what is in the landscape, and this memory is created and changed by society as they go forward. And in that sense, there's like a continuous reappraisal, in fact, of what was presented before. And for example, some French-speaking people were linked with, for example, with the Indian law, Indian Act, in fact, and there was discussion about, this, how we rename this, the Langevin building, for example, in Ottawa. So I think this memory is something that changed over time, and we should acknowledge, and there's a social debate. For example, some names will disappear, but some not. And in fact, there's like kind of having a value of discussing and making agreement between minority and majority on what is valuable for all of them. There's a discussion, Amherst was a case, and I think there could be a big debate about what's the real contribution of Amherst to the Canadian society. And I don't think it's like a community issue, being like, because Amherst was an English speaker. It's like, what is overall his contribution to the Canadian society? I don't know the example you made. These are just like guidelines, I think, that we should like consider in the discussion.
So Grant Myers gives a comment. There's a danger that official language minorities in this country, Quebec included, find themselves put on a shelf as so-called historical artifacts and are denied the ability to express themselves fully as contemporary communities that can envision and create a vital future. So I wonder, Alain, if you have any thoughts about that? And that's coming from Grant, who's a historian, may I add.
Yeah, I understand perfectly. And in fact, this comment came also when I discussed the Mayerville example, which was seen sometimes by some others like a folklore, like an icon that you agitate when you need of it. But my point here is not on that and in fact, it's like how can we make history a living element of identity of a community? And this is where, in fact, my proposal stands. It's because if we don't consider that, we're just missing, in fact, the how to build the community and relationship and consolidate, in fact, the social fabric, because and it's in that sense that recognition of this past is important, of this contribution, not only to the community, but to the majority too, because there is a dialogue that should happen. But having this dialogue about the past and integrating the memory is not making it like a fossilized element. In fact, it's making it like a discussion of a current situation that should be considered, and will be, in fact, helpful, for example, to present the contribution to the majority. In any case, could be for the French community minorities as well for the English one. But I know that I agree that sometimes we put history like just an icon or something that like, and then we go further, but it's not that way. I think it's getting into living history.
Thank you, Alain. Now, Glenn Patterson from Quebec Anglophone Heritage Network, or QUESCREN, which has been mentioned a few times, which is also where Grant is affiliated, among other places. Glenn has something to say.
Hey there. I enjoyed that. And thanks to Michel Thibault for that comment. I've been working with QUESCREN, doing a lot of stuff online. And I guess the realization came to me yesterday. We're producing all this content online. And I finished directing a big project for QUESCREN last year. And, you know, I think we produced about 100 hours of archival material. And I think the question a lot of times is a practical one, is like, where does this live and how can we make it accessible long after? I think especially in the English speaking communities, they're very independent. Like people in the Pontiac don't really know about the Chateauguay Valley. There's not like necessarily a sense of affinity. You know, like in Quebec, we have like les Archives Nationales, like this idea that it belongs to like the Quebec people. But for like official languages and minority, we don't have like a central repository where we can access our documentary heritage. And I was wondering if the Library and Archives Canada has a role already, or is thinking about a role in supporting the documentary memory of English-speaking Quebecers, and just maybe give us a sense of what that landscape is like already.
Okay, so just to, I can't talk about what BNQ do or do not, but for sure I can present that LEC, we have a program, Documentary Heritage, DHCP, Documentary Heritage Community Program, which supports, in fact, small organizations that are recording or, you know, giving access to archives, and for in fact for the 5 last years, the first 5 years of the program, this was like $1.5 million that were provided to LMCs, and many of them, a part of them was also to English-speaking groups. I haven't the list with me, you know, and I'm not the spokesperson for that program, but this is the kind of support that we can provide. I think the idea of having like those, because for sure we can, the LEC's depository is for national institution or as a national impact. So for the different, what's happening in the different provinces, we couldn't, you know, do the work, but we can support some. For example, some historical society, the Société d'Histoire Historique de Saskatchewan had support to build like a archival center, and some others. So there's like those are the kind of support we can do. And this idea of the conference is also to put focus on that issue. So because the conference we will hold on May is about giving like the full light on that issues, because often it's unknown. And I just give an example. There will be a report that will be launched later on this autumn about the libraries. And for example, in Quebec, it's interesting because there's a lot of little English-speaking libraries, but they are not linked all together. And this is something that has been like not really studied, even in from the Heritage Canada, Canadian Heritage Department. So anyway, we'll continue to make our best with our little means.
I have two things to say. First of all, very directly responding to Glenn's great question. Material that's not archival, but in library terms is so-called gray literature. It's kind of in the middle between published material and archival material. QUESCREN, our unit, is currently working with funding from the Secretariat for Relations with English-speaking Quebecers to create a database where we're going to be putting online materials produced by groups that such as newsletters, reports and other, but also videos, Glenn. And so we're not at the video stage yet. We're still working on our alpha and beta versions, but that will be one place where we can capture some of the material. And it's very much in line with Alain's thinking of gathering and capturing and making available heritage in order to support vitality. I have a question. Could you talk about policy implications for what you're doing?
That's a good question. For sure, in fact, the policy implication for could be like on different in different ways. The main question is how we can have positive measures. This is the point of how can memory institution could support, you know, the vitality. And for example, having this overall overview, of how memory could support, then we could provide tools. For example, this the HCP program, we provide money to associations, but if we provide them with tools saying, yeah, hey guys, you have money, but if you want to have like more in-depth impact, could you consider having like this and this and this? And for example, you digitize a collection. So why don't you organize a conference, have a website, or have everything? So different aspect of it. So it's giving it more impact. So this is at the LEC level, could be on policy. For sure, we hope that this question of memory and heritage could be raised in the process of reviewing the LEC Official Act. And this is my own opinion. I can't, as public servant or, you know, as LEC, do anything on this, but it's just an hope.
You might want, I bring your attention to a related comment from Patrick Donovan. You mentioned 12 indicators used by Canadian Heritage to measure vitality, and maybe could vitality of memory be a 13th? So yeah. dare to dream, Alain.
But I don't know what will happen with the indicators with the new version of the Act. So because there's like a bit of shift. So, but yeah, for sure there's an open discussion that could be done on that topic for sure. You know, it's really like, yeah.
Exciting for us memory people. Richard Boris.
Bonjour Alain. I was involved in the Vitality Framework in the 70s. One feature that we're interested in is the linguistic landscape part that you mentioned. And of course, with Bill 101 in 1977, we had the creation of la Commission de Toponymie du Québec. And then I look at some of the data which is available from la Commission. And French place names all told for Quebec was 69% in 1977. By 2000, it was 74% of all the linguistic landscape in Quebec, according to the toponymie with place names. I'm talking about place names. And for the English place names, in 1977, there was 20% of all the place names in Quebec were in English. And then, thanks to the work by the Commission de Toponymie, by 2000, there was only 12% of place names that were English in Quebec. So here we have a government institution that has the role of increasing the number of place names in French and decreasing the number of place names that are in English. And in a way, if you eradicate a place name, for example, from Catevale in Eastern Townships to Sainte Catherine de Hatley, well, after one generation, you have succeeded in eliminating from the memory of that minority of Anglophones in the Eastern Townships that they actually had the place called Catevale where a lot of English people were. So I think this is an interesting case of public policy that you mentioned before about, what governments can do to either increase the memory of place names or create memories for the place name for the French place names and eradicate or reduce the number of place names for English. And in a way, it's a way of at least decreasing the vitality of the English-speaking communities of Quebec when their place names are slowly disappearing from the Quebec linguistic landscape. So just wondering what you would say about that for different parts of Canada as well. But in Quebec, we actually have the commission that does it for us.
Yeah, it's a kind of, thanks Richard for the comment and the documented elements you mentioned about place names and their role. I agree that this is important, but in fact, you put me in a kind of difficult situation because as a federal public servant, it's difficult to me to comment on the Quebec side on what they're doing or not. I could like, that being said, and this is there's the same issue in other provinces about French names or English names. So, but the point here is that if we want to get out of this, out of a confrontation way of thinking to a way to integrate, in fact, and promote dialogue more than confrontation. I would say this should be considered in the discussion, how this should be, and this is a bit the way my report is presenting this aspect, because those minorities, English-speaking in Quebec as well as French-speaking outside Quebec, they are all contribution to Canadian identity and provincial or Quebec identity, but there could be like a new approach. And interestingly, in fact, but there are a few signals about this, is that there's more and more discussion about language and its relationship to culture. There were even Brian Miles in Le Devoir a few weeks ago, and after we published a lot of papers on French. They also mentioned how the culture is more and more, we should discuss not only language issues as an isolated topic, but as related to culture. So there's a room, I think, to discussion. And this is my plea, and I can comment further, I think. Sorry.
Thank you, Alain. Sam, I can give you 1 minute.
Yeah, just to continue the previous question about changing historical names, my point is that in the history textbooks, they put the new names in historical places. For example, my favorite, Fraserville, which was founded by the Fraser Highlanders, is now Rivière-du-Loup. And so what the history book says, Rivière-du-Loup was founded by it wasn't. It was founded, same as St. Andrews East, it's now St. Andre. It gives the impression that the Francophones founded St. Andrews, Fraserville, and they didn't. In other words, it's destroying the memory of English-speaking people and Francophones. And my objection to the Feds is the textbook, which this occurs, is funded by the Feds. And my last little comment, I'm afraid I think I regard you, this talk as very presentism. And I think federal people have moved from, I thought they were appeasing the Quebec nationalists. Now I think they're enabling the French nationalists by funding textbooks with historically wrong one last little point, the Americans in a race, George Washington fought over les Appalaches, not the Appalachians. According to the textbook, the Americans were looking for les Appalaches. They weren't, they were looking for the Appalachians. That's my point. The new names are being inserted into the past, which is destroying the historical memory of both Francophones and Anglophones.
Thank you, Sam. Alain, any 30-second wrap-up?
Yeah, that's okay. I really thanks everyone for their comments and the discussion. I appreciate. And if you have any more comments or interest in the report, you have a link, and so that's okay for me. Thank you very much again.
Thank you. Now I have 3 remarks to make. First of all, thank you, starting with Alain, who's been such an amazing colleague, a joy to work with over the years. Thank you for coming and presenting your important, and I think quite fundamentally important concept paper. Thanks again to our funders, who I've mentioned before, Secretariat aux relations avec les Québécois d'expression anglaise, Canadian Heritage, Concordia University, Canadian Institute for Research on Linguistic Minorities. And thank you to the audience members for engaging in, I would say, even the political comments are a sign of how live and how absolutely crucial this issue of memory actually is to communities. So without further ado, I will thank everyone for attending. And if everyone wants to unmute and say goodbye, that would be great.